You think you make your own choices. You choose what to study, where to work, who to love, what kind of life to live. But here is a question almost no one ever asks. What if most of your choices were made long before you were even aware of them? What if your decisions today are just echoes of rules you learned as a child, habits you never questioned, and fears you didn't choose? In this video, we're going to uncover who is really making decisions in your life, and why it might not be you. Subscribe to the channel if you want to understand yourself better and learn how the human mind really works. From the moment you are born, you enter a system that already exists. Family, school, culture, society, all of them come with expectations. They don't sit you down and explain them clearly. Instead, you absorb them quietly. You learn what is acceptable, what is dangerous, what is embarrassing, and what is praised. You learn when to speak and when to stay silent. You learn what success is supposed to look like and what failure feels like. And the strange thing is, most of this learning happens before you are able to think critically about it. As children, we don't question rules. We copy them. Our brain is designed that way. Psychologists call this social conditioning, the process by which we adapt to survive in a group. From an evolutionary point of view, this makes perfect sense. Thousands of years ago, not fitting in could mean being rejected by the tribe, and being rejected often meant death. So the human brain learns something very simple. Follow the rules, don't stand out too much, and you will be safe. The problem is that the world has changed, but our brain hasn't. Today, many of the rules we follow are no longer about survival. They are about comfort, approval, and fear of judgment. Yet we still obey them automatically. We call it common sense. We call it normal life. We rarely stop and ask a very uncomfortable question. Why am I doing this? Is this really my choice? Or is it something I learned to do without realizing it? This video is not about blaming society, parents, or schools. It's about awareness. Because once you understand how invisible rules shape your behavior, you start to see your life differently. And only then does real choice begin. Most of the time, we believe that adulthood means freedom. We think that once we grow up, we finally become independent thinkers. We imagine that childhood is the phase where others control us, and adulthood is the moment when we take the steering wheel. But psychology tells a very different story. Research in cognitive science shows that by the age of 7, a large part of our core beliefs about the world is already formed. Not finished, not locked forever, but deeply rooted. These beliefs act like invisible software running in the background of your mind. You don't see it, you don't hear it, but it constantly influences how you interpret reality and how you react to it. Think about how you react to authority. Some people feel anxious around bosses, teachers, or officials, even when there is no real threat. Others feel an automatic need to prove themselves, to be good enough, to avoid disappointing someone. Where does that come from? Usually not from logic. It comes from early experiences where approval meant safety and rejection felt like danger. The brain remembers those emotional patterns very well. Neuroscientists have shown that emotional memory is stored differently from logical memory. Even when you forget specific events, the emotional response stays. That's why you might not remember a single moment from school where you were criticized, but your body still reacts with tension when someone evaluates you today. Now look at your daily choices. Why do you choose a safe career instead of something that excites you? Why do you stay in relationships that make you unhappy? Why do you avoid risks even when the potential reward is high? We like to tell ourselves that we are being rational. But often what we call rational thinking is just fear wearing a smart mask. Fear of failure, fear of judgment, fear of being different. Studies in behavioral psychology show that humans are more motivated to avoid loss than to achieve gain. This is called loss aversion. From an evolutionary perspective, it helped our ancestors survive. From a modern perspective, it often keeps people stuck. Social rules play a huge role here. Nobody forces you to compare your life to others, yet many people do it every day. Nobody orders you to measure success by money, status, or productivity, yet these ideas feel almost universal. That's because they are culturally inherited. Just like language, we inherit invisible frameworks for how life should look. And once something feels normal, we stop questioning it. The brain loves shortcuts. Questioning deeply costs energy. Following familiar patterns feels efficient and safe. Look at simple behavior. Standing in line, apologizing automatically, feeling guilty for resting, feeling proud for being busy. None of these are natural laws. They are learned behaviors. Anthropologists have shown that different cultures value completely different things, yet people inside each culture feel that their rules are obvious. This should already tell us something important. If rules change across time and place, they are not absolute truths. They are agreements. And many of those agreements were made long before we were born. The most powerful part of this system is that it rarely feels like control. It feels like personality. I'm just not that type of person. I'm not brave enough. I prefer stability. But where did those definitions come from? Were they chosen consciously, or were they slowly shaped by years of reinforcement? When children are praised for obedience and punished for curiosity, they often grow into adults who fear questioning authority. When emotions are ignored or mocked, people learn to disconnect from their own feelings. Over time, this becomes automatic. The choice is already made before the situation even appears. This doesn't mean you are weak. It means you are human. The brain's main job is not happiness or freedom. Its main job is survival. And for most of human history, survival meant fitting in, not standing out. The problem is that many of us are still living by rules designed for a world that no longer exists. And until we see that clearly, we keep repeating patterns we never consciously selected. If you pay close attention, you can actually feel this process happening inside you. Imagine a moment when you wanted to say something honest, but stayed silent. Or a moment when you felt a strong impulse to act differently, but a quiet inner voice stopped you. That voice rarely says, "This is dangerous." Instead, it says things like, "This isn't appropriate. People will judge you." Or "This isn't how it's done." That voice feels personal, but in reality, it is often a collection of borrowed rules. Psychologists sometimes call this the internalized authority, the mental echo of parents, teachers, culture, and social expectations living inside your head. One famous experiment that illustrates this is the Milgram obedience study. Ordinary people were willing to follow instructions that went against their own moral instincts simply because an authority figure told them to continue. What's important is not the extreme setup of the experiment, but the underlying lesson. Humans are surprisingly willing to give up their own judgment when responsibility feels external. In everyday life, this doesn't look dramatic. It looks like following a career path because it's expected, staying quiet because it's polite, or delaying dreams because now is not the right time. The authority is no longer a person in a lab coat. It's a feeling. Another powerful force is repetition. The brain learns through patterns. When you repeat a behavior often enough, it becomes automatic. Neuroscience shows that repeated actions strengthen specific neural pathways. Over time, the brain chooses the familiar path because it requires less energy. This is why change feels hard even when we want it. You are not fighting logic, you are fighting biology. Your brain prefers the known discomfort to the unknown possibility. Even if the unknown could be better, it is still uncertain. And uncertainty has always been risky for survival. This is where society becomes very efficient at shaping behavior. You are rewarded for conformity in small, constant ways. Approval, smiles, praise, inclusion. And you are punished for deviation, often subtly. Silence, disapproval, exclusion, being labeled difficult or strange. None of this needs to be written down. Children learn it quickly. By adulthood, most people don't even notice it anymore. They call it maturity. They call it realism. But often, it is just adaptation. Think about how people describe their limitations. I can't do that. I'm not creative. I'm bad with risk. These statements sound factual, but they are often conclusions drawn from past experiences. And past experiences happened under rules you did not choose. If a child is repeatedly told to be careful, not to dream too big, not to fail, the brain learns a simple equation. Safety equals approval. Years later, the adult still follows that equation, even if the environment has completely changed. What makes this even more complex is that these invisible rules can conflict with each other. Society tells you to be unique, but not too different. To be confident, but not arrogant. To work hard, but also be happy. When these rules clash, people feel anxiety, confusion, and self-doubt. They blame themselves, not realizing that the problem is the system of expectations, not their personal ability. This creates a constant inner tension, where no choice feels fully right. The most important thing to understand is this. Awareness does not immediately free you, but it gives you space. Space between impulse and action. Space between fear and decision. When you notice a rule, you can finally ask whether it still serves you. And that question alone already changes the direction of your life. At some point, the real shift begins. Not when you rebel against everything, and not when you try to erase the past, but when you start to see it clearly. You realize that many of the limits you feel are not walls, but habits. They were useful once. They protected you, helped you belong, helped you survive. But protection can quietly turn into a cage if it is never questioned. And cages are strongest when we believe they are part of who we are. Freedom, in this sense, is not doing whatever you want. That idea is too simple. Real freedom is understanding why you want what you want. It is recognizing when fear is speaking in the language of logic. It is noticing when an old rule shows up in a new situation and calmly deciding whether it still deserves control. This doesn't happen overnight. The brain resists change. It prefers certainty. But slowly, with awareness, new paths form. Neuroscience confirms this too. The brain remains plastic throughout life. New patterns can be learned. Old ones can weaken. When you see this, something important changes. You stop judging yourself so harshly. You understand that hesitation, doubt, and fear are not personal failures. They are echoes of a long human history, passed down through families, cultures, and systems. And once you see the echo, you no longer mistake it for your own voice. You begin to listen more carefully. You choose more deliberately. The past does not disappear. It never fully does. But it stops pulling you blindly. It becomes information instead of instruction. And that is the quiet power of awareness. Not loud, not dramatic, but deeply transformative. When you understand the invisible rules that shaped you, you gain the rare ability to decide which ones you carry forward and which ones you finally leave behind.